and to trust each other, right? So I want to do one thing. I was thinking, so I teach in the School of Theater and Dance. And so obviously I'm an actor and all that good stuff. And so I was like, do I want to do improv? And I was like, no, that can't work. But I want to do something really quick. We're going to do something. Y'all know how to suck your teeth, right? Right. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and then y'all suck your teeth. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. All right, so that was polite. Give me like a nice... Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Yes. So if you don't want to be on the receiving end of that, put your phone on vibrate. All right? Put your phone on vibrate. Just don't touch it. Let's just have a day of a community. So in my hand is my phone. I'll be using it throughout the day. I want to acknowledge, first of all, that today we're going to be officially green certified. So what that means is any trash you might have, let's just use the right waste baskets and all that stuff. Without any further ado, let me get to some of my talking points. I want to introduce the person that kind of inspired this entire event. So I just asked the Provost how long this has been going on. And so he said about 7 or 8 years. And so I want to just read his quick bio. I'm sure we all know him, but here we go. Dr. Joe Glover has been Provost and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs since July 2008. Dr. Glover arrived at UF in 1983 as an assistant professor in mathematics. He chaired the mathematics department from 1993 to 1998 and served as associate dean for faculty affairs in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences from 1998 to 2001. Beginning in 2001, Dr. Glover served as associate provost for academic affairs for 6 years and as interim provost for 9 months. Dr. Glover chaired the task force on the future of the University of Florida, helped develop the university's strategic plan, and represented the university on the executive board of the New World School of the Arts. He has served as interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences in 2007, 2008. I invite you to check out his resume. It's actually really impressive. What's also impressive is the people in this room. I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your Friday. And I want to also acknowledge all the people who helped make this event possible. So if you give me a second. First and foremost, let's acknowledge the groundskeepers. Let's acknowledge everybody who is working on the sound system, on the lights, everybody who's recording this event, and also the individuals who helped organize this event. So this event was organized in partnership with the Consortium on Trust in Media and Technology, the College of Journalism and Communication, Center for Public Interest Communications, the UF Office of Research, the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Center for Humanities and the Public Sphere. Without any further ado, I want to bring out the Provost, and I look forward to spending more time with y'all. Here we go.
Thank you, Ryan, and welcome everyone to the 2020 Provost Gathering, the first one of this decade. As scholars, we serve humanity in the pursuit of knowledge and insight. And of course, as we produce knowledge and insight, we'd like to disseminate it for the betterment of society. And one of the interesting things is that society has to be willing to receive, at least to contemplate what we say, and to invest in some of our expertise. Today, we face decreasing levels of trust in the media and a variety of institutions, not just universities and scientists and social scientists, people who study ethics, but also all of the institutions that really are the pillars of our society, whether it's government or religion or community leaders. And universities have not been exempted from that diminishing trust. So as we look for ways to rebuild the public's trust in academic institutions, we have to acknowledge that we can only control what we ourselves do. And so if we're going to rebuild trust, we have to engage with the public in new ways and demonstrate the relevance of our work. And so that's what today's symposium is all about, a little bit of a conversation about how we go about doing that, this phenomenon of decreasing trust, efforts to rebuild trust, and the context in which all of this is happening. So this is a really great program, I have to say that, whereas it says the Provost Gathering or the Provost Symposium, basically what we've done is just lend our name to it. All of the work in organizing this really fantastic program has been done by others, whom I'll thank at the end of my little speech here. But I'm really excited about today's program. It does appear to be wonderful, and apparently you are as well. The wait list for today's event had nearly 100 people on it. And so today we have a stellar program, and we'll be hearing from some of the world's most thoughtful people on this topic. The Op-Ed Project, Science Friday from NPR, Beena Venkataraman, and our state's own Chief Science Officer and UF faculty member Tom Frazier. But what I'm most excited about are the breakout sessions that are going to be held today. Nearly all of these sessions were proposed and organized by our faculty colleagues, and this is the first time we've done this in the context of these gatherings. And in what felt like a little bit of a risk at the time, you chose them by voting on the ones of greatest interest to you. The sessions that were chosen for presentation here were the 10 top vote getters, and you had apparently strong opinions. There were more than 1,700 votes cast to determine those top 10 winning breakout sessions. So it's going to be a great day, and I look forward to sharing it with you. I'd like to thank our events organizers, whose names are listed in your program, and who did, frankly, all the work for this, especially the Graham Center, the Office of Research, the Center for Public Interest Communications, and the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere. So thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoy the day, and I turn it back now to your host, Ryan.
Thank you. Okay, so as you know, we got some celebrities in the house. First of all, I want to acknowledge you, the celebrity. So in addition to your presence, we have with us the founder and CEO of the Op-Ed Project, Ms. Katie Orenstein. She writes and speaks frequently about the intersection of media and mythology, that is, what we think is fact or fiction, and how that shapes our ideas about politics, culture, and history. She has contributed to the op-ed pages of the New York Times, Washington Post, and Miami Herald. Her commentaries on women, politics, popular culture, mythology, and human rights have been nationally syndicated and appear in anthologies. She has lectured at Harvard and Stanford universities and appeared on ABC TV World News, Good Morning America, MSNBC, CNN, and NPR All Things Considered, my favorite. A graduate of Harvard and Columbia University, she is the author of Little Red Riding Hood Uncloaked, Sex, Morality, and the Evolution of a Fairy Tale, which explores stories told about women over 500 years across multiple continents and how they shape our lives today. It has been translated into multiple languages and is under consideration for a television series. Orenstein has lived and worked around the world, and particularly in Haiti, where she traveled as a folklore student and journalist in the 1990s during a time of political upheaval. As a result of that experience, she has reported extensively on Haiti, organized fact-finding delegations for journalists, scholars, and lawmakers, and consulted with the United Nations Human Rights Mission. In 1996, she worked with a team of international human rights lawyers to assist victims of military and paramilitary violence in seeking justice. Orenstein has received a Peabody Gardner Fellowship, Tinker Grant, and the Cordier Essay Prize from Columbia University, and was a finalist for the 2004 Prize for Promise, designated to identify young women aged 21 to 35 of great promise and vision who could become world leaders in their respective fields. It's with great pleasure I present to you Ms. Katie Orenstein.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and then a little bit about what we've learned and what we do, and then I want to lead us in a live experiment in credibility. This is my organization, and this is the question that drives us. Who narrates the world? This is a question that has driven me my entire life. I grew up in a loving family that disagreed on everything. Maybe you know what I mean. I was always asking, why are we going with that person's version of the story? Why them? And then I went to school, and I started noticing the same things. Why are those people the ones who get to say what happened all the time? And I grew up, I went to college, and I studied folklore, the study of stories. And while I was in college, I read a folklorist named Zora Neale Hurston. She has roots in the American South, including in Florida. And she was a professional adventuress. And she had gone to Haiti and Jamaica and written a book about it. And I read that book, and I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. So I applied for a grant to go to Haiti and Jamaica. That was the early 90s, and while I was there in Haiti, a coup broke out. So instead of writing about folklore, I began to write about what was happening in the streets, what was a very violent military era. And eventually I became what some people call a journalist. But I never called myself that, because journalism and folklore are such different fields, and they worship different gods. Can you all guess what I mean? Folklore and journalism have such different ideals. Journalism worships the god of objectivity. All the news that's fit to print, just the facts. And folklore worships the god of versions. There are many different versions of the truth. And so for about 10 years, I had a crisis of identity in my career. What was I, and what was I about? Until eventually, I came to realize that the questions that most people were asking, including most of my peers, were not the questions that were driving me. I think most people, when we think about the news and history, we think, and especially journalists, we think that the most important questions are what's true and what's false. And these are very important questions, especially in an era like today, where we have things like alternative facts. But to me, they're not the most important question. When I think about how history gets shaped and how the world gets shaped, I think the most important question is who is telling the story. Because when you think about it, we live in an infinite ocean of facts and interpretations and people and events. And somehow through that ocean, we choose a thread that we call history. Or histories. Some people who are enlightened call it histories, plural. But I think even that word is inadequate because it's an infinite ocean. Which facts do we pay attention to? And who gets to choose? I've written about all kinds of things over the course of the last 2 decades. I have written about violence, rape, torture, arson, murder, massacre, assassination. And I've also written a book about a fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood. And I've written about pop culture and media and women and power. Most of the things I write about come at the intersection where there are conflicting versions of the truth. Arguments about what really happened. This is an area of specialty for me. But one thing I never thought I'd do is found an organization. That really wasn't something I had ever thought about. And then about a dozen years ago, something happened. A big debate broke out in the United States and also across the globe, but particularly in the United States. And it's a debate that's been going on for centuries. But a particular moment broke out. The debate is, why do we hear so few voices from so few people in the world, and especially so few women? And maybe some of you remember the statistics. I want to give you a sense of where we are. So those are pretty tough numbers. And a big debate broke out in particular about the nation's opinion pages. In 2008, the year we were founded, these are the numbers for men and women. Women were about 15% of the major opinion pages. These are the pages that feature expert voices. They're not penned by journalists. They're penned by people like you and me, experts in our field, people with knowledge, and overwhelmingly by men. I want to take a moment to show you where we are today. This is where we are today in 2019. Women are now 26% or more. This is our latest data. We collect data across hundreds and hundreds of outlets. So essentially what we've done is we've created an index of voice. It's like the S&P 500 of voice. And you can see that over the last 10, 11 years, we've had an enormous leap in representation for women. Of course, what we do is about a lot more than women, but the reason I want to show this slide is so many of us work on what I call forever problems. Do you know what I mean by that? Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that within the forever problems, there are also solvable problems, and some of them imminently solvable, and this one is one of those. It's possible to change the demographics of voice. I want to tell you how this all started. About a dozen years ago, a little bit more, a big debate broke out. At the time, Larry Summers was the president of Harvard University, and he wondered why there were so few women in higher math and science. Does anyone remember that? Yeah, he wondered if it could be due to a lack of biological aptitude, that women lacked the biological aptitude. And it sparked a lot of debate. It pissed a lot of people off and sparked a lot of debate, including parallel debates about other industries, including the media and the op-ed pages. A syndicated columnist named Susan Estrich accused the Los Angeles Times of sexism because at the time that she spoke out, 90% of their columns were by men. And then Maureen Dowd, who was then the only woman columnist at the New York Times, weighed in. And she said, no, it's not sexism, it's socialization. Women are afraid of being attacked. We don't want to be called bitches. By the way, the New York Times prints that word, so I always say it. And then Anne Applebaum, who was then the only woman columnist at the Washington Post that year, maybe you can sense a pattern, she weighed in and she said, what, me, a woman journalist? Why should I have to waste a column on my female status? I'm a thinking journalist, that's all that should matter. And this debate was circulating, moving around. It took up the better part of a year, and I followed it with a lot of interest, in part because I study these things, and in part because I am or could be called a woman journalist. But mostly, I was intrigued by this debate because I wrote for a number of the outlets that were weighing in, and I knew something that seemed so obvious to me that I couldn't believe people weren't talking about it. And it's this. The single greatest predictor of who got published was who pitched. And the pitching ratios were shockingly skewed. This is one data point from the Washington Post. The Washington Post did a 5-month tracking of who pitched their opinion page over that period of time, and they found that 9 out of 10 pitches came from men. And as you can see, guess what their publication ratio was? It was more or less 9 out of 10. So you could see that pitching was predicting publication more surely than 4th grade predicts 5th grade. And it occurred to me, isn't the obvious solution to get more smart women pitching? I mean, it might be sexism, it might be biology, it might be the weather. How would we know? You can't win a game if you're not playing it, and this game is called history. Forever and ever, the Washington Post tagline was a rough draft of history. And I had a moment to think about why this mattered, because even when I was very green, right out of college, writing pieces for places that none of you has ever heard of, occasionally my pieces would get syndicated, and they would fly around the United States or foreign countries, and I was speaking at universities and on television, and I went to the White House to meet with the Latin American Affairs advisors under the Clinton administration. And so I had an insight into why this might matter. An insight that told me that some places, ideas matter more than others. In some places, ideas can be heavily leveraged. And this is how the story begins. This is how our story of the world begins, and how the world itself gets made. And it looks something like this. This is a chart of how ideas and individuals rise in influence. And you can check it. There's nothing holy about this chart. You can check it for yourself, check your own gut, and see if you agree with it. But the basic idea of this chart is you need to put an idea out into the world if you want it to have impact. You can't just hold it in your heart or at the kitchen table. And if you put an idea out into the world here on the left, in whatever forum or way, if it's any good, maybe people will talk about it. Maybe you'll be cited in academic journals or on social media or word of mouth, and maybe your idea and your name will spread, and you'll gain exposure. And if that happens, maybe you'll be invited to speak about it on television or radio. Maybe you'll receive a book deal or funding or a fellowship or consulting offers. Maybe you think that these are pie in the sky thoughts, but in fact, these are the standard responses to ideas that spread in our ecosystem. In fact, this is what our ecosystem is designed to capture and elevate. And if that happens on the right-hand side here, maybe you'll be invited to positions, or maybe you'll have access to power at the highest level across all industries, voice in all kinds of ways, not just literal. Political power, academic influence, financial say, corporate board seats, leadership positions across all industries, not just media. And then you'll have a higher and higher amount of influence. So this is a chart, really, of how ideas and individuals come to rise in influence and change the world. And I want to point out the obvious. On the right-hand side, it's really hard to get there. Is it not? What I mean is, it would be hard to wake up one morning and successfully run for Congress if you hadn't already made a name for yourself. But on the left-hand side, if you have an idea and some credentials, it's not so difficult to put it out there. And often, that's where it all starts. And you can trace a lot of people back along this chart, including people like Larry Summers. I want to take a moment to say, why does this matter, not just for us as individuals, but for the world? This is how our world gets made, because the story we tell becomes the world we live in. Just like in the Bible, first God said, and then there was. In the beginning was the Word. The story we tell determines what wars we fight, and what diseases we fund, and what research we fund. It determines who goes to college, who goes to prison, who the police force see as threat or who the police force protects, who gets birth control, who rises to political office. Everything. The story we tell becomes the world we live in. So I spent a little time with this question, this dilemma. How do ideas and individuals rise in influence, and how does the world get made? And where are the entry points, the root causes and entry points where ideas and actions can be leveraged? And for the last 11 years, we've been spending time on that with my organization, the Op-Ed Project. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what we've learned and play a game with you all. One of the things that we've learned is that the technical things that we do are not nearly as important as the way the systemic and cultural forces around us function and also get internalized. So I want to play a game with you all. It's called the credibility game. Are you up for it? Great. So I'm going to ask for a couple of volunteers, and I'm going to ask, can we turn the lights up in the audience? And this is how we're going to play. This is the object of the game, to establish maximum credibility in the minimum amount of time in the eyes of your peers in this room, using only true statements. So if you've noticed, there are 4 elements here. Maximum credibility in the minimum amount of time in the eyes of your peers here in this room, using only true statements. This is the object of the game and how you win. We'll come back to this. And this is how we're going to play. Each of us, we're going to work in groups, and each of us is going to complete this sentence in your group. Hello, my name is. I'm an expert in because. Hello, my name is. I'm an expert in because. And I think you are seated in a way that each of you should be part of a group, so that if you turn around to the people behind you, you'll be a group of somewhere between 6 and 10 people at the most. Is that so? Yep. All right. So before you start, we have just a little bit more information I want to give you. Before we start, let's define our terms. Let's define our terms. In particular, let's define the word expert. What credentials does an expert have? Can you all just shout out? Experience, knowledge, training. And if you saw an expert speaking on TV, what kinds of things would float beneath their credentials? Like what? Title, affiliation, publication, education. Great. Awards, maybe? Nobel Prize, perhaps? So yes, here are some of the things that you might see floating under someone's head. PhD, MBA, JD, titles, affiliations, awards, citations, publications, books, experience, lived or personal. If you have these things, I want to encourage you to use them when we play this game. And I want to encourage you to play this game to win. It would be so easy to lean back and chit-chat right now. But I also want to tell you something that I've learned over the last 10 years, which is this is a rare opportunity to explore how credibility works. I guarantee you it's affecting you every single day. If you are not playing this game, it is playing you in ways that are shaping how far you go and where you go, and also where the world goes. And this is a unique opportunity to experience how it works. So I want to encourage all of you to play to win. If you're playing to win and you have any of these things, you would certainly use them. But never fear, because even if you didn't, we're going to use a more expansive definition of the term for the sake of this game. This is the definition we're using. You are the go-to person on your topic out of everyone in this room and potentially far beyond, but at least in this room. Does everyone have it? You are the go-to person on your topic. So, what if I told you I was an expert in Florida? Or what if you said you were an expert in Florida? Would that work? No, why not? Too broad, yeah. Everyone could say it or not say it equally. So what would you need to do? Yeah, specify, get smaller, get more specific. Exactly. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips. And the first tip is be specific. I'm going to just give you an example of how specificity is your friend. There was once a young woman, actually a teenage girl, who said she was an expert in motocross racing, which is excellent. It's great. But there are many people who do motocross racing and very few teenage girls who do it. So if she says she's an expert at teenage girls and motocross racing, she's carved out a much more competitive angle for herself. Do y'all see what I mean? As the go-to person. Second tip here is to use the exact phrase. Hello, my name is, I'm an expert in, because. I'll put that back up on the screen before we start. And the third tip here is choose anything you want to say you're an expert in, anything at all, but just one thing, not everything, not 360, not your whole existence. So you could pick your research, or you could also pick a hobby or some weird obsession with Star Trek that goes back 30 years, and you know everything about the Borgs. Whatever you want. Whatever will allow you to be most competitive and play this game to win. But just one thing. So this is how we're going to play. I'm going to go first, and then I'm going to ask for 1 or 2 volunteers so I can model how you'll play in a group. So think about whether you are feeling courageous. And then I will give you just a little bit of instruction, and we'll break out, and you'll play within your group. So this is how I would play, just to go first. Hello, my name is Katie Orenstein. I'm an expert in the fairy tale Little Red Riding Hood, because I wrote a book called Little Red Riding Hood Uncloaked, Sex, Morality, and the Evolution of a Fairy Tale. Can anyone knock me off that pedestal? I think unlikely. I'm really playing hard to win here. I know the people who know more about that fairy tale, and most of them I know by first name. So that's a way to play. And I want to ask if there's a volunteer, 1 or 2 volunteers, and I can model how we might play together. Anyone? Who raised their hand there? Ah, great. Can you stand up? And I think there's a mic in front of you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Beverly Dede. I'm an expert in medical student counseling because I have held that position in the College of Medicine for 26 years, and I have a PhD in counseling psychology.
Okay, so first, it's hard to go first, so we got to applaud that. Second, what landed? What were her most notable or memorable credentials? Experience, PhD. Anything else? 26 years. Why did that land? That's a long time. Great. Is there anything you'd like to know that would make it even stronger? How many students have you worked with?
A lot. There's 135 students per class, so times that by 26 years. I usually see probably a good third of the students throughout the given year for individual counseling, but I also provide workshops and participate in orientations and lunch sessions, so I touch every one of them in a way, but in terms of individual counseling, probably about a third of the class come through.
Great. Great. What about, does anyone want to know where her PhD is from? Sure.
Southern Illinois University at Carbondale.
All right. All right. So I'm modeling how you might play the game, and there are 3 steps. Can anyone figure out what they are? What's the first step? For us, the facilitators, it's applause, right? Don't skip that step, people. What's the second step? What landed? What worked? What was memorable? And what's the third step? What questions do you have that might make it even better? Yep, what questions or feedback? 3 steps. So thank you for volunteering. So, yep. So you are each in a group, and if you are the person in your group who's closest to this corner, so I should say closest to the stage on your left, can you raise your hand? If you're that person in your group, you are the timekeeper. Each person in your group is going to have 2 minutes. 2 minutes to not only to speak, but to receive your questions. So the entire time, please don't cheat them out of their 2 minutes. If they speak and you're like, that was great, don't then suddenly start talking about the weather. That's their time. Like, figure out how you can use it well. If you're the person who's closest to that corner in the room, meaning the back of the auditorium towards your right, in your group, if that's you, raise your hand. Great. If that's you, you're the facilitator for your group. So your job is to support the timekeeper and remember those 3 steps. The 3 steps again are applause. Do not skip that step. We should be hearing people applaud. The second is what landed, what worked, what credential was most memorable. And the third step is what questions or feedback do we have that could make it even better. Let me also invite us all to say that there are forces that make us want to chit-chat, and there are forces that make us want to be super polite. Those forces don't serve us well here. I would ask you all to be kind rather than polite. And kind means this is the opportunity to give people real information that will help them and can potentially help them quite a bit. So I want to invite you all to lean into that. Is everyone with me? Okay, yeah? Everyone with me on that? Okay, so what we're going to do is groups are different sizes. If you have a small group, you might want to give everyone a little more time. Maybe you want to give 2.5 minutes. I'm going to let you use your own discretion for that. We are going to do the first 10 minutes. I'm going to wander around and hear what you all are saying. We will break in the middle. So after 10 minutes, we'll break, and we'll see what we've learned. And then we'll go and we'll do everyone else. Before we start, let's just see if everyone remembers what the object of the game is. Let me see if we all remember. The object of the game is to establish maximum in the minimum, in the eyes of, using only true statements. Great, good. All right, are you ready? All right, on your mark, get set, turn to your groups. Buddy, just can we break and come back together? It's 10 minutes, and I promised you we would just take a moment to come back together and see what we've learned. So can I invite everyone to just face me for a moment? And I just want to take a few things that I heard and see what was happening, if they resonated in the rest of the room. We had a question in one group about what a term meant. The term was sustainability. What do we mean by sustainability? There's more than one thing it could mean. And I wonder, did anyone else have terms that needed to be clarified? If so, if that happened in your group, raise your hand. Yeah, almost everyone. So I want to take a moment to talk about jargon. We're all aware of what jargon is. Jargon has a bad name, but a really useful purpose. Can anyone shout out what would be a useful purpose for jargon? Clarity? Power with your peers? Shorthand, yes. Shorthand with your peers. You can be fast and accurate with your peers. So jargon has a really useful purpose. A bad name, but a great purpose. Your best bet is to be bilingual, to be able to speak the jargon of your field and to be able to speak a lingua franca that everyone not in your field can recognize and understand. You're going to say that's obvious. You're going to think, as I would think, that the reason this is important is so that you can communicate with people outside of your field. And that's certainly true. But that's not why this is important, the most important. The reason this is so important is because if you can only speak in jargon, it means the jargon owns your knowledge, not you. It means your knowledge will be locked in your jargon, and you are unlikely to see or understand the full range of ways that your knowledge applies outside of your field. And why is that so important? The reason that's so important is that's the history of good ideas. The history of innovation of ideas is a history of cross-pollination across fields and disciplines and people, of unlikely collisions, just like the history of biodiversity. Essentially, you want your ideas to be able to have sex, right? I also want to take a moment to talk about how this shows up differently for different people. Because one of the things that we've studied for the last 10 years is how different people are playing this game differently. And I just want to point out, for those of you who know, and maybe for those of you who have never thought about this, that some groups of people are allowed to take much greater liberty with their ideas. They can say wildly creative things, get it kind of right, and move forward. But if you belong to a group of people that's constantly questioned or doubted, which is most people who are underrepresented in voice and power, then you'll feel a pressure to stick closer to your jargon if you're questioned a lot. And you may notice that people who write about controversial things from underrepresented groups will have a lot more footnotes. Has anyone noticed that? There is a book by one of our fellows. Carol Anderson was a fellow of ours at Emory, and she wrote a book called White Rage, which has had an enormous impact in the public sphere. And a huge, you can just check for yourself, a third of the book is footnotes, and notes. So if you belong to a group of people who are constantly questioned, I want to invite you to be aware that there is a logical reason why you might want to hew closer to jargon, and also there's a consequence. If we stick very close to the jargon of our field, it's less and less likely that we'll have those kind of wild cross-collaborations and cross-pollinations that could lead to brand new ideas or even brand new fields. I don't want to suggest that I know the answer to that dilemma, but only want to suggest that we need to find a cha-cha through that, if that applies to you. We need to be aware of it and find a way to dance through it. I want to point out something else that I heard coming up. Somebody used numbers. They quantified to establish credibility. Did anyone here, if you had people in your group who used numbers, years of experience, numbers of students, numbers of dollars, numbers of articles published, numbers in any way, if that came up in your group, raise your hand. And did anyone in any group, if it came up in your group that a person had a very wide range of estimate on their numbers, raise your hand. Yeah? Oh, group over here, please raise your hand. I want to take a moment to talk about quantification. Whenever you can quantify, as long as the number is impressive, it's almost always going to enhance your credibility, as long as the number is impressive. Now, if the number is not impressive, obviously go for quality, right? Obviously. Not everything can be quantified, not everything should be quantified, but some things scream for quantification, and you should know that. For example, if I tell you I'm an expert fundraiser, what do you need to hear from me right away? How much have you raised? Exactly. So that's a nice observation that we can all take with us. But I also think there's a more important observation that we've learned over time, and we've been watching something mysterious happen in our rooms. The rooms that we work in, people across all identities, affiliations, positions can come to our rooms, but we seek to overrepresent the underrepresented. And so in our rooms, we're always paying attention to the dynamics that show up differently for those of us who are represented in Voice and Power. And one thing that we've noticed over and over again is that in our rooms, people are lowballing our numbers, not just a little, but a lot, without realizing it. The best way to explain how that happens is to tell you a story. I was in a room once where there was a woman, a Cuban woman, who said she was an expert in rumba dancing because she had been dancing for 5 or 6 years and had won 2 or 3 awards. That's what she said. And the numbers were a little bit dodgy, 5 or 6, 2 or 3, and I thought to myself, well, I'm pretty sure she knows these numbers, and I know what the numbers are, actually. I barely even need to ask. I've never met a woman who said she's won 2 or 3 awards and meant 2. Have you? And also, those are not big numbers. You would never say, I have 2 or 3 kids, right? I know she knows the number, and I know the number is 3, but I want to hear her say it, and so I ask her, which is it? Have you won 2 awards or 3 awards? And of course, she says 3. And then I say, which is it? Have you been dancing for 5 years or 6 years? And she thinks about it, and she says 6, well, actually 7. And so I say, okay, great, let's start over. You've been dancing for 7 years, and she interrupts me immediately. No, I've been dancing for 20 years. So I said, well, how can that be? You just said 7. And she said, 20 years American ballroom, 7 specialized in rumba. Now let me ask you, do you think those 20 years are relevant? Of course they are. 20 years in American ballroom, 7 years in rumba, and you've won 3 awards. Immediately she interrupts me, no, 10 awards. In American ballroom, 3 for rumba. Are they relevant? Of course. So we do the whole thing over, and only then at the very end does it occur to me to ask what those awards are for. I'm thinking state or county fair. I say, what are those awards for? And she goes, oh, I'm the American ballroom champion. And that's funny. Except it's kind of not. Because only when I walk you down that path and tell you that story can you fully appreciate how much the rumba dancer had diminished herself. Everything she said was accurate, but she had presented herself at the lowest accurate numbers, not the highest. And why would she do that? This is my hunch. If you belong to a group of people who are questioned a lot, maybe questioned all your life, maybe you begin to internalize safe numbers, preemptive numbers. And maybe after years or decades, you don't even know you're doing it. If that's you, and I want to invite you to consider that it probably is you, unless you know it's not, then while we play this game, first of all, I want to say that's a logical response to the culture, a logical response. But during the course of this game, while we're playing, I want to invite you all to think about what your highest accurate numbers would be. Not the floor, but the ceiling. And then I want you to, for the course of this game, experiment with doing the math in your head and seeing how it feels to present yourself at the highest accurate level. Are you all on board with that? Yes. One more thing, one last thing I want to say. Did anyone have a group where somebody had so much evidence, so many credentials that you couldn't remember them all? If that was true in your group, raise your hand. Okay, so some of you had what I call the treasure trunk problem. I want to take a moment to talk about that. If we have so many things to say that people can't remember it, what will happen is people will remember arbitrarily whatever landed with them and not necessarily the things that we think are most important. So let me ask you a question. How long do you think you have in a game like this to capture our attention? Okay, I've got 6 seconds, 30 seconds. Anyone else? 10 seconds? 15? Y'all are in the ballpark. The research says that when you have a visual, you have about 30 seconds, and when you don't have a visual, meaning radio or phone, you have about 7 seconds, which is why radio sound bites are always so short. And with social media and Twitter, it's shot it all to hell. I have no idea how much time you have, but it's like that. So that's a brief amount of time. In case some of you are thinking, well, how could I possibly get it all into 30 seconds? I want to say relax. It doesn't mean that that's all the time you ever get. It just means that's how long you have the benefit of our doubt. And so if you want to capture our attention, if you want to get to those 3 magic words in the English language, not I love you, but can anyone guess what the 3 magic words are? I trust you. And also, in a similar vein, tell me more. If you want to get to those words, you may need to front load in those first 30 seconds the most important things, maybe the 2 or 3 most important things that you understand the other party needs to know to be able to listen to you. And then maybe you'll get to say more. I used to have this dilemma pitching editors. I would make a long list of everything. I would have no idea what they would say, what they would want to hear. I would take a huge, deep breath. My heart would be pounding, and then I would say it all with one breath, like 60 or 90 seconds of speech, and then I couldn't talk, and then I wouldn't even know if they were on the other end of the line. And it was a terribly unsuccessful strategy. Just want to let you know, I want to serve. I sometimes feel like my best service is to give you an example of what not to do. And eventually I learned that the best thing to do would be to say less, but the most important things, and ask if the person had a minute. Do you have a minute? I would learn all kinds of extraordinary things, like maybe there would be a better time, or maybe there would be a better person, or maybe the thing I was talking to them about would never work. It had absolutely, no interest to them whatsoever. Better I find that out quickly and move on. So you have about 30 seconds. 30 seconds to capture our attention. Those are 3 things that have come up, and I want to release you back to the, I see you there. I want to release you back into your groups in a minute. I see that there are a couple of questions, so I'm going to take just 1 or 2 questions now, and then we'll leave the rest for after, but I saw you had your hand up. Yeah, so the question is, why should the person we're speaking to care about your argument? Or really, in this case, care about you because you're making an argument for your own credibility? And it's a good question. I can't actually give you the answer to that. My best answer to that is to say that you've identified the key question. The key question, and it's going to be different in every audience. So your ability to assess what your audience needs to hear from you, to sort of find the Venn diagram overlap between what you need to say that is accurate and fair, and what they need to hear that will allow them to open their ears to you, will change from audience to audience. All right, I'm going to release you back, and you should be halfway through. Before we start, are there any questions about procedure? Or is that going well? Is the facilitation working? Yes? And is everyone remembering to clap? And is everyone remembering to ask what landed, what worked? Yep, don't skip that, people. And then is everyone remembering what questions or feedback do I have that would make this even better? Okay, great. So I'm going to release you back, and it should take about 10 minutes, and I'll meet you back in this same spot in 10 minutes. Okay. You should be done. How many of you are done? Great. If you're not done, you can take a few minutes afterwards. But I just want to take a moment to bring us all back, and if you can all find a way to turn and face me. A few more things that I heard coming up. Did anyone in your group have anyone with super impressive credentials where their body language or tone didn't match their credentials? A lot of people. I just want to take a brief moment here. This is really a moment about being aware of what we're doing. Credibility is not just what you say. Credibility is an experience you create. And it's an experience you create in others, and it tends to mirror the experience that we're having ourselves. So if you are trying to establish credibility, what you're really looking for is a sweet spot, like the sweet spot when you hit a tennis ball. You're looking for that sweet spot feeling where you know you're credible. And if you're not there, you may need to move left, right, up, down, forward, back, but you need to find that spot because credibility, you want your tone and your body language to match your credentials to create an experience of credibility. Sometimes I will talk to people and I'll see that they feel reluctant or hesitant or are shrugging their shoulders. By the way, I watched people have a fantastic turn and then say, and I just want to say the game is what we're playing all the time, not just between the start and the stop moment that's in our brain. And sometimes what I'll do when I'm talking to somebody who has that kind of hesitancy is I will act like the annoying 5-year-old. Have you ever seen the annoying 5-year-old who says, why? Until the person gets just a little annoyed, and then they stand up straighter and they're like, I'll tell you why. And the minute you see the finger going out is when you know you're experiencing that like gut level somatic experience of credibility. Second thing, did anyone here use personal experience? If you had somebody in your group who used personal experience to establish credibility, raise your hand. Yeah, that's great. I heard a really good one over here. I want to take a moment to talk about personal experience because so many of us leave it out. And I've asked people over and over again, why do you leave it out? And I think there are a series of answers that happen. These are the 5 big ones. It's personal. Like if you study HIV policy and you're HIV positive, it might enhance your credibility, but it's personal. You study incarceration, you have family members in prison, it might enhance your credibility, but it's personal. The second reason is that people say is it feels like a soft credential compared to your PhD. So, maybe you study neuroscience and you infant motor control, and you've done hundreds of tests on your infant daughter. But it's a soft credential. Your PhD is the one you think is hard. Third is fear of bias. You study labor and your parents are union organizers, but it might make you look biased. Fourth is identity politics. People don't want to play identity politics. Do I have to reveal my immigration status to write about immigration? Isn't it enough that I'm a thinking human being? That kind of thing. Has anyone heard it's research, not me-search? That's come up sometimes. People have said that. Particularly people who study marginalized groups feel that anything personal is more vulnerable for them than perhaps for their peers. The fifth reason that people give is a poignant one that I want to stop on for a moment. It's selflessness. And the best way to explain what I mean is to share something that came up in a room. I was in a room of all international human rights workers, all very well known, and one of the people in the room said she was an expert at child slavery. This woman was very well known because she had headed human rights centers at major institutions or major human rights organizations. She was well known to everyone. And so after she stated her expertise, we moved on. And then under her breath, she said, and until I was 10, I was a child slave. And the whole room sort of paused and murmured. And we all turned to her. Why wouldn't you have mentioned that? it so happened that I had gone to school with this woman, and I had never known that about her. I said, Chivy, why would you never have shared that? And she was a Cambodian woman. She said, because I want my research to be, and my work to be about the children I serve, not about myself. Has anyone ever felt that way? I immediately understood her intent. But at the same time, I looked around the room and I could see that she had just made herself exponentially more credible and powerful in a room full of people positioned to advance her cause. And so it made me think a lot about how we use or don't use personal experience. And this is what I want to offer for all of you. The reasons that we don't share personal experience, and if you're among those of us who aren't sharing, there are good reasons, valid and logical reasons, and only you will know whether or not it's worth sharing. But don't imagine it's inconsequential. Personal experience matters. It is a valid credential, and it's often your most powerful credential because it allows other people to connect with you. Everyone in that room who knew this in this moment, knew that fact about Chivy, was talking to her at the break. So personal experience, whether or not you choose to mention it, it matters, and it's often your most powerful credential. One more thing I want to ask. Did anyone have a very impressive credential in your group, an impressive degree or award or something really fancy? If anyone had something really impressive in your group, raise your hand. And now let me ask you another question. If anyone in this group had a very fancy credential, a fancy degree or institution or award or achievement that would have enhanced your credibility, but you did not mention it, raise your hand. Yeah. And one more question. If anyone in this room has ever been in a situation where you had a fancy degree, not just in this room, but if you've ever been in a situation where you had a very fancy credential that you knew would have enhanced your credibility, but you did not mention it, raise your hand. Yeah. Can somebody tell me why? One or two people just shout out, why wouldn't you do that? Humility? It changes the conversation. Humility, anything else? To encourage other voices. How nice.
Maybe because we think we're not really experts in a topic.
You think you're maybe not really experts? We call this conversation, this concept, we have a word for it. We call it the concept of shiny baubles. Shiny baubles is our word for your most impressive credentials. And the reason we call it that, can you guess? If you pull those credentials out of your pocket, everyone goes, ooh, let me see. And one of the things we notice is that in our rooms, people are disproportionately not sharing their shiny baubles, including when we're playing a game called the credibility game, where the objective is to establish maximum credibility, and where people admittedly believe that their credential would enhance their credibility, and yet they're not mentioning it. We've had not one, but two rooms where there was a Nobel Prize winner who didn't mention their Nobel Prize. Let me tell you, people, if you're playing the credibility game and you don't mention your Nobel Prize, you're not playing the credibility game. Not sure what game you're playing, but it's not the credibility game. I want to just share with you the answers that you shouted out are similar to answers that other people shout out. Humility, and it's often phrased in the opposite. Don't want to be a braggart. Don't want to look like a blowhard. Don't want people to feel like I'm shutting them down. Don't want to look like an ass. Don't want to look arrogant. Don't want to be disliked. Don't want to be thought a bitch. Again, the New York Times prints that word, so I always say it. And if you think about it, the language itself tells us a lot about what's going on in our heads. Think about it. Almost all of those phrases start with, don't want to look like. I want to offer up that the conversation around shiny baubles, which, by the way, is disproportionately affecting women, overwhelmingly affecting women, the research on this is really good, and I think it's an epidemic level conversation happening everywhere, and almost like an illness. It's happening everywhere, and it's affecting us in enormous ways. And I want to propose to you that a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it, a huge amount of it, is about how we'll look. And I want to invite you to consider that that's a very disempowering internal conversation that has been foisted on us. And I want to offer you an alternate conversation. If and only if you agree, I want to invite you to substitute the conversation for how it would make me look with the conversation of what might I accomplish of value if I dropped my shiny bauble, if I showed my shiny bauble. Notice that that doesn't tell you to always share it or never share it. It's still up to you. But if you think that's a more powerful internal driver, and obviously only if you do, I invite you to swap it for the internal conversation of how might I look. Because the conversation of how I might look puts your ability to shine in the hands of others. This is a conversation, we didn't make it up. It appears in moral and literary texts throughout the ages. When and how do we use our privilege? When and how do we use our shiny baubles? And I want to take a moment to say, for human beings in our rooms, this question is not equal, it's not the same, it's not experienced the same way. For women, all women, dropping your shiny baubles is a conundrum. You all know it, do you not? Raise your hand if you feel in your gut that this is a conundrum. Yeah, the research shows that for women, competency and likability negatively correlate, whereas for men, competency and likability positively correlate. What that means is, if you're going to drop your shiny baubles, if you're a man, it's going to make you more liked. And so, think about it, it's an acculturation of green lights, all green lights, high reward and low risk over many years. Whereas for women, all women, it's high risk, low reward. And if you wonder what that looks like, take a look at Hillary Clinton and her presidential campaign. And whether or not you knew the research, and it's well documented, you knew it in your gut. You do know it in your gut. And I want to offer that if we are not sharing our shiny baubles, that's a logical and intelligent response to the culture that we live in. And yet, it hobbles our already difficult challenge of being taken seriously, being taken credibly, being trusted. It hobbles that too. And so, without telling you the full answer, which I can't offer, I do want to say we need to find a cha-cha through that. We need to find a dance through that. And I want to offer that possibly a starting point might be the question of what could I accomplish of value, rather than how would I look. Let the end determine how we would behave, the intended outcome shape how we behave. Somebody asked, I just want to address quickly, because somebody asked, how do young people establish credibility quickly? And I just want to offer, there's so many conversations that we could have, but I want to offer one just because somebody asked about that. When we function in the world, we are always functioning not only as ourselves, but within the context of the world that we live in. And the world that we live in receives us in a perceived context and hierarchy of expertise. There are actually many hierarchies of expertise out there, but one of them is the hierarchy of younger and inexperienced at the bottom and older and experienced at the top. Most of us recognize that hierarchy, do we not? Yeah. And it's great if you're older and experienced. Not so great if you're younger and inexperienced. And so what many young people do, maybe you've even experienced this or seen it or done it yourselves, what many young people do is pad their experience, pad their resume, describe what they've done as if it was longer, more venerable, or more impressive, try and creep their way up that hierarchy. And I want to suggest that something you already know, which is this is not a very good strategy because it's easily exposed. A much better strategy would be to invert the hierarchy of expertise so that your perceived liability becomes your asset. Let me give you an example. There's a very young person who was writing about education reform. She was just graduating from college. And there are people with decades of experience and research on this, on education reform. How can she compete with them? Why would you listen to her? Let me tell you why. She started everything she said with, to be sure, there are people with decades of experience and wisdom and research on this topic, but when was the last time you heard from somebody who still had a locker? Right? Sometimes people say, oh, no, you're getting it wrong. We live in an ageist society. Young people have all the benefits. We're discriminating against older people. And the same strategy, the same tactic can work for that as well. Ronald Reagan did it very famously when he debated Walter Mondale. He said, I won't hold my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. Do folks remember that? You can apply this to anything, but a strategy would be to examine how your liability can be your asset. I want to take a moment to close, and if you've been following along, here are some of the things that might have come up in your group or that we might have learned from. Quantify. Whenever you can quantify, you have a good odds of increasing your credibility, but beware of lowballing. Be specific. Some of us fear pigeonholes, but there's a great power because credibility, our peak credibility, often comes at the epicenter of our knowledge. Personal experience, often your best credential. Jargon and the power of metaphor. We didn't talk about coherence, but when your evidence matches your expertise. Shiny baubles, asking yourself what could you accomplish of value. We didn't talk about finding the I and we, but many of us are talking about the group, not about ourselves. Evidence versus passion, key difference there. That might have come up, we didn't talk about it as a group. 30 seconds, that's about how long we have to capture people's attention. These are some things that might have come up for you, and I want to point out that these things resonate differently across different groups of people with different positions and power and identities. They are not the same, and hopefully, as you played this game, you could see that playing out in your own groups, that the credibility game, if we really want to see how it works, we're also going to see how it works unfairly. And yet, at the end of the day, we have to find a way to dance through that with integrity, because the alternative is to not be able to have our ideas taken seriously. All of these things are things that might have come up, but I want to also take a moment to share with you what comes up in prior rooms. We have run this experiment in room after room after room, over a decade, thousands of rooms, and one of the things we've learned is that people in our rooms, by the way, people in our rooms are not general public. Everyone has come through multiple filters. You were identified, your institution identified this and you to be here today, and you're spending your time here with us. And in our longer programs, people come through extensive and highly competitive application processes. So no one here is random. Everyone here has been through a series of filters, known and unknown, selected because you have ideas that are important for the world and you believe they should be said. And yet, in most of our rooms, over and over again, we find people spending the bulk of the credibility game on reasons we shouldn't listen to each other. Like the way these things come up, not really playing the game to win, over and over again. The things that came up in this room come up over and over again. It feels like I'm bragging. It feels like I'm not being humble. I'm not the real expert. Maybe somebody else knows more. I'm too young. I'm too old. I'm not a real doctor because I don't have a PhD. I'm not a real doctor because I don't have an MD. People will laugh at me. Number one answer that came up in a prison reentry program we worked in. And the implications are profound. The implications of how we play this game on the inside in a room like this are shaping the world on the outside, how the game is played on the outside. And again, if you don't think you're playing the game, I want to invite you to consider the game is playing you. This is a game that shapes the story we tell and the world that becomes as a result of it. And I want to invite you to think about the implications with a scenario. I'm going to offer you a scenario that is intentionally melodramatic, and here it is. What if you believed you knew the cure for cancer? What if this was a room of cancer patients and you believed you knew the cure? Would you share what you knew? There's no right or wrong answer, but what would you do? If you think you would share, raise your hand. If you think you might not share, raise your hand. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. For somebody who said you would share, why would you share? Because it's important? It's needed. Let me ask you a question. In this scenario I gave you, is it possible that you might be young? Is it possible that you might be old? Is it possible that you might not have the right degree? Is it possible that people might laugh at you? Is it possible that people might think you were bragging? Is everything that came up in the game possible in this scenario? Is it not? So let me ask you this. What's the difference between this scenario and the game we played? Because it looked like everyone gave pretty quick answers. The stakes are higher. For whom? Everyone. So who is this scenario about? Everyone. Other people. I want to invite you to make a shift in your thinking if you haven't done this already. And truth be told, you've all done it already many times. But the more intentional we can do about making this shift over and over again, the more powerful it is. And the shift is this: from a position that we call fear of self, fear that I don't know enough, fear that I don't know everything, fear that I don't know anything, fear that somebody else knows more, fear that I'm not the real expert, fear that I'm too young, too old, don't have the right degree, don't have the right look, don't have the right experience, that people will laugh at me, people will think I'm bragging, fear of self. And shift from that position to a position of social responsibility where you are driven by an awareness of your potential impact and value to others. Just to be clear, it doesn't make all those considerations go away. People might laugh, you might be young, people might think you're bragging. Let those be considerations, and let the driver be an awareness of your potential impact and need. Also, there's a few things that didn't come up, but it's important to bring them up. In this scenario, is it possible that you might be wrong? That you might hurt people? That you might raise false hope? Or kill people? Yeah, those things are true too. Possible too. And sometimes people say they would not share for those reasons, or they would hesitate to share what they knew for those reasons. And if you think about it, those reasons, those people are also coming from a position of social responsibility. There's no right or wrong answer to this scenario. The goal of this scenario is to prompt us to wrestle with how we would treat ourselves and our knowledge if something big was at stake for the world. Because of course it is. One more thing, here's a takeaway. Maximum influence driven by maximum awareness of your value to others. This is where we will find maximum influence. One more thing, how did you feel about the term expert? I heard some people complaining about it. Did anyone feel uncomfortable? If you felt uncomfortable at all, raise your hand. Yeah, a lot of people. Would you have felt, here's our definition, would you have felt more comfortable if we had used the term resource instead of expert? Yes. Did anyone notice that we define them synonymously? Take a look. A lot of us think that there's a hierarchical definition of expert, but we did the opposite. We did a resource-based definition, synonymous with resource. And sometimes people ask me, then why not just play the game using the word resource? Like, what are you trying to pull, Katie? And the answer is, resource is not the word the world uses when it sorts us into who tells the story and who gets told. In our culture, in many cultures, the word expert is a very particular and very powerful word, and it's a dividing word. In the Bible, a word like this would be called a shibboleth, and it divides us into who tells the story and who gets to tell the story and who gets told. If you have a problem with the term or concept of expert, then welcome to the club. A lot of us do, myself included. But if you hold that in one hand, in the other hand, I would ask you to hold this question. How do you feel about other people using that word and telling your story for you and all those you represent? None of us is getting out of this unscathed. I'm at 0 seconds officially. I want to end by saying a couple of things. When you walk out this door, hopefully the things that we have taken with us and the things that we have talked about, I just want to be super clear, this was not an instruction set. This is not how people talk to editors. I hope you all know that. And it's definitely not how people talk at cocktail parties. I hope you all know that. The purpose of playing this game is to see what we could learn about our own relationship with the terms of power. And whatever you do with it when you walk out the door is completely up to you. I also want to take a moment to say why. Why do we have this fraught relationship with these terms and this game? And it stems from virtues. I can hear it. I can hear it in this room. The virtues are humility, modesty, responsibility, egalitarianism, fairness. We don't want to buy into a system that selflessness, buy into a system that isn't fair to other people. But sometimes what I witness is an abuse of those virtues. Selflessness to the point of self-abnegation, where some of us don't even want to say we're an expert at anything, even when defined in a non-hierarchical way. And it ultimately becomes quite selfish because nobody else gets to benefit from our knowledge and experience. This was a relatively short session for what we do in the world, and so I put this screen up here to let you know we run programs of all different lengths across the nation and across the globe. The purpose of what we are doing is to try and interrogate reality and understand why some ideas and individuals rise and come to change the world, and others don't. And at the root of it, our mission is to change who writes history, to change the story and change the world, and to ensure that our story and our world reflects our democracy, our population. If you want to join us, these are cities where we have upcoming day-long programs, and the day-long programs all result in concrete outcomes, including op-eds. And you can find us on the website. We work in a rotation of cities, so we're doing these cities over and over again, and we are coming to Miami, and lots of other things too. So my colleague Catherine has her email there if you want to know more. And for now, I just want to say it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. This is a great thing you're doing, and I could not be more honored to get to be here with all of you. It's the best adult education job a person like me could ever have. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Let's give it up for Katie. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, even backstage. I want to acknowledge that this is not easy. Y'all had no idea you're going to do group participation. So look to your partner and just say, we did that. The people around you, we did that. We handled that. We friends now, we did that. I want to push it even further. So you know how it is. I'm sure you probably came here with a couple of colleagues, or you noticed them across the room. The thing is, when lunch happens, we'll likely kind of go in our little clusters. I want to push you and invite you to keep this going, right? Let's keep making new friends as we build this trust community. I have a couple of announcements. One is, so the breakout sessions will be happening in various locations throughout the building as well as Harn. If you don't know this building or Harn, I need y'all to get out more, okay? For real, for real. All right. The other thing is, in the spirit of our certified green thing we have going on, if you brought your own coffee cup as we asked you, you can skip the line, right? Listen, it's your world. It'll be coffee out in the lobby. Don't even get in the line, just jump. Another thing, lunch will be served upstairs in the lobby, so you can get your meal and go anywhere, get some vitamin D outside. The only location is in here. We want to try to keep this as clean as possible, so you can sit anywhere, and with your new partners, it'd be a good idea. And then finally, we're going to be back here. Our afternoon session starts at 1:15, so if you could be here a little bit early. So we're going to still kind of have the partitions, but we invite you to come down closer. Let's just make a community. We're here together anyway. All right? I will see y'all at 1:15.